Gandhi's Passion: The Life and Legacy of Mahatma Gandhi by Stanley Wolpert. The Indian Ambulance Corps was disbanded long after the Boer War ended, however, and Gandhi decided to return to India in 1901, hoping to find a place in the Congress, possibly as Gokhale's full time assistant. Feeling that his work was no longer in South Africa but in India, he wanted to expand his field of service, knowing how much more remained to be done in India. Vacha had been elected to preside over the Congress session to be held in Calcutta in that December, and Gandhi was invited to join him in the first class carriage in which he, Sir Feroze Shah Mehta, and Gokhale journeyed together across India from Bombay. Gandhi had drafted a resolution in support of equality for South Africa's Indians and the abolition of the £3 tax. He hoped to win a strong National Congress support for it, but Mehta responded without enthusiasm. Gandhi, so long as we have no power in our own land, you cannot fare better in the colonies. His ardor for reform and resolution was further dampened as he became more familiar with the Congress, which would meet 3 days every year and then go to sleep, he recalled, and the delegates would do nothing themselves. He had abandoned South Africa, feeling cut off from the center of India's national agitation, whose famed leaders he had glimpsed during his visit 5 years ago. But seeing them up close, their petty prejudices and vanities disillusioned him. He felt at a loss to know where or how to begin the revolution, required to wash away all the pomp and lethargy to let in cleaning waters of true national service, currents of selfless commitment to the uplift of India's millions. His disillusionment at that Calcutta Congress included finding caste segregation and Hinduism's cruelest prejudice against the untouchables, poisoning what should have been the nation's noblest institution. To the Tamil delegates, even the sight of others whilst they were dining meant pollution. So a special kitchen had to be made for them, walled in by wickerwork. He noted no limit to the filth and pollution inside the Congress grounds, left uncared for by upper caste volunteers who viewed all cleaning as scavengers' work. Gandhi shocked them, finding a broom and cleaning his own latrine. Yet hundreds of others were left to fester and stink. Another week of that Congress session, he feared, would lead to the outbreak of an epidemic. At 32, Gandhi was impatient, eager to affect change wherever he went. "I'm here to do anything that is not beyond my capacity," he told both Bengali secretaries of Congress who lauded his spirit. Soon he was put in charge of sorting out and answering a heap of letters. Next, he volunteered to button Secretary Ghosal's shirt, noting later that he loved to do it as my regard for elders was always great. He also taught himself to iron and took special pleasure in carefully ironing Gokhale's silk scarves. The resolution he proposed to Congress's Subjects Committee was unanimously passed, but only after Gokhale seconded it and Vacha supported it. Once again, when Gandhi rose to read his brief motion, he found that his head reeled and he could barely speak. The procedure was far from pleasing me. No one had troubled to understand the resolution. Everyone was in a hurry to go. He was disillusioned with virtually everything he learned about Congress, procedures, and politics, and even found his guru, Gokhale, wasting time by frequently going to the posh India Club to play billiards. He accompanied Gokhale there and recorded his distress on seeing how rich Indians decked themselves out. How heavy is the toll of sins and wrongs that wealth, power, and prestige exact from man. For a month he apprenticed himself to Gokhale, admiring his diligence and integrity but disliking the way he always attended the Viceroy's Legislative Council in a horse drawn carriage. Gentle Gokhale was pained by his disciples' reprimand and tried to explain how high office brought certain duties that could not be shirked. When you are the victim of as wide a publicity as I am, it will be impossible for you to go about in a tramcar, Gokhale explained. But Gandhi's own habits were to become more austere as he would reject all the elegant trappings of the mechanized modern world. He was still clad at this time in a long Parsi coat and trousers. Soon he would wear nothing more than a scant hand woven dhoti or loin cloth. During his winter visit to India in 1901 to 1902, Gandhi began what was to become his most famous means of long distance travel, journeying from Calcutta to Rajkot as a third class railway passenger. He wanted to acquaint himself with the hardships of the third class passengers. What he learned was depressing, finding that third class passengers were treated like sheep and that the compartments were not only overcrowded but also filthy. The passengers themselves threw rubbish of every variety on the floor, smoking and chewing betel nuts, spitting blood red juices, turning the entire carriage into a spittoon, yelling and using foul language. It proved a painfully instructive journey for the young barrister training to become a Mahatma. He went back to Rajkot to practice the profession he had been certified to pursue in London. He was helped in getting briefs by his father's old friend, Dev Joshi, and no longer felt too shy to stand and speak in court. But Rajkot was still too much of a backwater, so Dev urged him to venture to Bombay rather than allow himself to be buried in Gujarat. He rented chambers in the busy fort area of Bombay near the High Court and found a house in Girgaon, to and fro from which he walked from chambers. Low-lying, mosquito-infested, polluted Gaum all but killed his son Manilal, who suffered an acute attack of typhoid compounded by pneumonia. Gandhi nursed the boy day and night, wrapping his fever-racked body in wet sheets, keeping him on a diet of orange juice and water, refusing to allow him to touch either the eggs or chicken broth prescribed by their doctor. In addition to the wet sheets, Gandhi gave his son hip baths and prayed, repeating Rama's name all night. Who can say whether his recovery was due to God's grace or to hydropathy or to careful dietary and nursing? Soon after Manilal recovered, however, Gandhi moved his family to a fine bungalow in suburban Santa Cruz, where the air, water, and light were less contaminated. For Gandhi, the trip to his chambers was too long a walk. For several months, therefore, in 1902, he relapsed to riding first class on the commuter train, buying a round-trip season ticket at reduced price from Santa Cruz to Churchgate. There were, however, slim pickings for fresh barristers in the High Court, so he spent much of his time in the library there rather than auditing the courtroom arguments of senior barristers. Just as he was starting to feel neglected and a bit bored, a cable came from South Africa. Now that the British had defeated the Boers in Transvaal and the Orange Free State, taking control of those former republics, Colonial Secretary of State Joe Chamberlain was headed for Durban to review the situation in South Africa personally. Dada Abdullah and his friends requested that Gandhi return immediately to press the Indian community's case with the Crown Ministry on their behalf. I had an idea that the work there would keep me engaged for at least a year, so I kept the bungalow and left my wife and children. He took 4 or 5 of his cousins and nephews, however, including Magan Lal Gandhi, who was soon to become one of his staunchest disciples and closest confidants. Prolonged separation from his wife would only help him keep the vow of sexual abstinence, which he had been trying for several years to observe, though with little success. He blamed his early failures on his weak will and lust, reflecting, "To be fair to my wife, I must say that she was never a temptress." The prospect of a year's separation, therefore, hardly daunted either of them. It would, however, be another 4 years before Gandhi was finally ready to keep his vow never again to have sexual relations with his wife. The separation from wife and children was for a moment painful, but I had inured myself to an uncertain life. All else but God, that is, truth, is transient. Chapter 7. Satyagraha in South Africa. Gandhi returned to Durban on the eve of Joe Chamberlain's visit to South Africa to celebrate Britain's victory over the Boers late in 1902. Dada Abdullah and his friends welcomed their barrister home and immediately put him to work, drafting the Indian deputation's memorial to be presented to the colonial secretary the day they met with him. Chamberlain had, however, come primarily to get a gift of £35 million from British settlers who now had free access to Transvaal gold, Gandhi recalled. So he gave a cold shoulder to the Indian deputation. Never easily discouraged, Gandhi resolved to press Indian demands for more equitable treatment by following the indifferent Crown Minister from Natal to Pretoria. Britain's victory in replacing Boer law with its own did not open the Transvaal to Indian settlers, only to white Englishmen. Indians were required to obtain special permits to enter the Transvaal and, unless they were prepared to bribe officials in the new Asiatic department to the tune of thousands, permission was denied. Gandhi, however, appealed to his old friend, police superintendent Alexander, and was soon on his way to Pretoria. Transvaal officials, angered at his having managed to procure a permit by mistake, flexed their petty muscles, preventing his meeting once again with Chamberlain, arguing that Pretoria deputation should only include resident Indians. His friends were insulted enough to suggest they cancel the meeting, but Gandhi insisted they go without him, having drafted their strong memorial. I smarted under the insult, but as I had pocketed many such in the past, I had become inured to them. No longer the thin-skinned young barrister Oliphant had ordered thrown out of his office. He never again would allow disappointment to defeat him. The arrogance of the Pretoria's autocratic Asiatic department served only to convince Gandhi to settle in the Transvaal rather than return to Durban. I could see that the Asiatic department was a frightful engine of oppression for the Indians. I saw that I had to begin my work from the very beginning. He had gone home the year before with high hopes and every intention of staying on in India, either in Rajkot or Bombay. His plan had been to re-establish residence there and find legal work enough to support his family while serving Gokhale and Congress, in the greater national interest. But Mehta's aloof indifference and all the glaring flaws he saw during the Calcutta Congress and his month with Gokhale, not to speak of his failure once more to find work at Bombay's bar, gave him renewed appreciation of the loving support and trust lavished upon him by Dada Abdullah and his loyal friends in Natal's Indian community. Now that he was back among them, he could clearly see that if I returned with the vain fancy of serving on a larger field in India, while I was fully aware of the great danger which stared the South African Indians in the face, the spirit of the service which I had acquired would be stultified. His work was in the Transvaal, not in Bombay or Calcutta, but his admiring, trusting, devoted Gujarati mercantile friends implored him to remain in South Africa. 10 of them were eager enough to contribute funds on an annual retainer basis for his legal services. So he enrolled as a barrister in the Transvaal's Supreme Court in Johannesburg and opened his office in the heart of the frontier capital of Britain's newest gold rush colony. He organized a Transvaal British Indian Association, pressed charges against the corrupt Asiatic Department officials, and led a deputation to call upon the British governor of the Transvaal, Lord Milner. He also wrote a cogent summary of the Indian questions in South Africa, copies of which were sent directly to Dadabhai Naoroji and Sir William Wedderburn, who ran London's British Committee of the Indian National Congress. Wedderburn passed his copy on to Whitehall's Secretary of State, the latter sending it to Viceroy Curzon in Calcutta. Gandhi also kept Gokhale informed with weekly letters and copies of all the documents and wrote as well to the editor of The Vegetarian in London. He thus kept very busy as lawyer, publicist, organizer and official lobbyist for the Indian community of Natal and Transvaal, which now numbered over 50,000. Indians are entitled to equal privileges with Europeans in this British colony, Gandhi argued to the Indian Times. On the ground, firstly, that they are British subjects, and secondly, desirable citizens, industrious, frugal, and sober. On June 4, 1903, Gandhi launched his first newspaper, Indian Opinion, devoted to the Indian community and its needs. In his first editorial, Gandhi sounded more like an Englishman than an Indian nationalist, denouncing prejudice in the minds of the colonialists and the unhappy forgetfulness of the great services India has always rendered to the mother country ever since Providence brought loyal Hind under the flag of Britannia. He appealed both to the members of the Indian community and to those of the great Anglo-Saxon race for support of his paper, created to promote harmony and goodwill between the different sections of a mighty empire. In the next issue, however, Gandhi was more caustic in his criticism of his imperial brethren. Gandhi was harshest in his criticism of Lord Milner for his defense of the Asiatic Office and the £3 tax on all ex-indentured Indians and restrictions on Indian entry to and property rights in Transvaal, merely because the Indian is a coloured man. What angered him most was that Milner advised the government of India to ship many more indentured Indians to South Africa to help develop Transvaal mining, but insisted that all of them must be required at the end of their indentures to return directly to India. If you must introduce Indian labour, Gandhi reprimanded Milner. Be just, be fair, do unto us as you would be done by. Thus, drawing upon his knowledge of Bible, Gandhi became the hero of his community and the bane of British officialdom. from Johannesburg to Durban. By the end of June 1903, Gandhi knew that the public work he'd started would not end in 1 year nor in two. He wrote to his lawyer friend in Rajkot, Haridas Vora, to ask illiterate Mrs. Gandhi if she would agree to remain there without him for another 3 or 4 years. If she does not, of course, she must come here at the end of the year and I must be content quietly to settle down in Johannesburg for 10 years or so. He hoped she would consent to remain in India, since that would enable me to give undivided attention to the public work. As she knows, she had very little of my company in Natal. Probably she would have less in Johannesburg. However, I place myself absolutely in her hands. If she must come, then she may make preparations and leave in November. He clearly preferred by now to live as a celibate of with a life of work rather than being attached to Kasturba, distracted day and night by his wife and young children. But his sense of responsibility was too deep rooted to allow him to break his promise to bring her to South Africa in a year, unless she agreed, which of course she did not. For Kasturba, living with her husband's relatives but without him, hardly ever able to see her own parents or siblings, was worse than all possible arrangements. Gandhi tried his best to dissuade her from joining him, however, sending a copy of his letter to Haridas Vora to his nephew Anganlal in Rajkot, urging him to try to convince your aunt that it will be best for her to remain in India. Kasturba had always been stubborn. However, she resolved to join him after 1 year's separation, as he had promised on the eve of his departure. Gandhi's law office in the booming, noisy heart of Johannesburg kept no fewer than 4 Indian clerks as busy as he was from early morning until late at night. A handsome painting of Christ hung on the wall above his own desk, with photos of Dadabhai Nauroji, Gokhale, and Annie Besant adorning the other walls. He attracted two full-time assistants, both English Jews, 23-year-old Henry S. L. Pollack, who would remain one of his most loyal followers for the next decade, and theosophist Louis W. Rich, another enterprising idealist, lured to the Transvaal by gold fever but who chose to remain on the Rand in the service of the budding Mahatma. Pollock and Rich proved eager to fight for minority rights and the dignity of all humans, whatever their ethnicity, color, or religion. Gandhi's secretaries in Johannesburg were two lovely young Western women. One was a Scottish beauty he called Miss Dick, who immediately prepossessed me, and before very long became more than a daughter or a sister to me than a mere stenotypist. A few months after she started working for him, however, Miss Dick married. Then Gandhi found another more remarkable young female stenotypist, bookkeeper office manager, Sonia Pesin, a 17-year-old Russian Jewish whose dark-eyed beauty was as radiant as her brilliance. She, like Henry Pollock, remained at his side throughout the ensuing decade of struggle. Gokhale would later marvel at the sacrifice, the purity, and fearlessness of Miss Schlesien, ranking her first among all of Gandhi's co-workers. By the end of 1903, though his legal earnings of £5,000 annually were more than enough to support his large residence on the outskirts of Johannesburg, as well as his spacious office across the road from the High Court, Gandhi remained restless, searching for a better base on which to develop and integrate his life of community service as an active agent of social reform. He soon found a cause when torrential rains in 1904 drenched the gold mines and Indian bazaars of Johannesburg, triggering an epidemic of pneumonic plague. Poor Indian mine workers were particularly hard hit, restricted as they were to the bazaar ghettos, living in overcrowded quarters with garbage infested alleys. Germ bearing rivers of rain spread the plague with such intensity that Gandhi shut down his office, turning himself and all four of his Indian clerks, as well as his legal assistants, into a volunteer nursing corps. Sacrifice is the law of life. He wrote that month in Indian Opinion. We can do nothing or get nothing without paying a price for it. Christ died on a cross of cavalry and left Christianity as a glorious heritage. Joan of Arc was burned as a witch to her eternal honor and to the everlasting disgrace of her murderers. The Indians in South Africa, Transvaal in particular, are undergoing many troubles. Unless we are prepared to stand and work shoulder to shoulder without flinching and without being daunted by temporary disappointments, failure would be the only reward, or rather punishment. He was bracing his community for the fiercest struggle, sensing as he did so that all of his earnest appeals to British officials from Chamberlain and Milner down to the lowliest functionary in the Asiatic department, even when met with smiles and gracious promises, were doomed to failure. The greatest sacrifice, he well knew, was made in one's self-interest. Gandhi's self-interest now embraced the entire Indian community of Natal and the Transvaal, all of whom he was ready to serve in court or out. He now wrote his articles in Gujarati so that more Indians could understand his passionate message while virtually no English eyes could comprehend it. Transvaal inspectors blamed Indians for bringing bubonic plague to Johannesburg from Bombay. But Gandhi insisted that the plague had broken out entirely owing to the unsanitary and overcrowded conditions in which Indians were forced to live, aggravated by the recent bad weather. The only way to keep hundreds and thousands more from dying, he argued, was to burn the entire infected area to the ground and resettle its inhabitants in a temporary camp. People were in a terrible fright, Gandhi recalled, but my constant presence was a consolation to them. Many poor Indians had buried all of their savings of silver and copper under their homes, and they frantically dug up those coins before the location was burnt down. Gandhi now became their banker. He kept careful records of each person's saving, had all the coins sterilized, and deposited nearly 60,000 pounds into his own bank, returning their savings to each individual a few years later. Indian Opinion had, by the fall of 1904, become the most important publication for the Indian community of South Africa, keeping its members informed on issues of current interest to all. But the publication and distribution of a weekly paper remained a growing drain on Gandhi's own resources, so much so that in October 1904, he decided to take the overnight express to Durban to reorganize the journal, which was being published there. Henry Pollock saw him off at Johannesburg station and handed him his copy of John Ruskin's Unto This Last, urging him to read it. Ruskin's interest in social reform, based on his artistic sensitivity, made him reject Manchester's industrial ugliness, degradation, and pollution. It echoed Gandhi's own concerns and strong feelings. Ruskin's idealism, inspired in part by Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism and Robert Owen's utopianism, stressed the equal value of all manual work and the importance of craftsmanship to each human being's creative growth. The book was impossible to lay aside, Gandhi recalled, reading it all that night. I was determined to change my life in accordance with the ideals of the book. Those ideals, as he understood them, were first of all that the good of the individual is contained in the good of all, that a lawyer's work has the same value as the barber's, and that the life of a tiller of the soil and the handicraftsman is the life worth living. He later translated this seminal work of Ruskin, which helped to transform his life, into Gujarati, abandoning its biblical title for the Sanskrit compound Sarvodaya, literally the uplift of all, which he adopted as the name for Gandhian socialism.